Let's revise what we have discussed so far, okay? First thing, the JDK installation and installing Spring Tool Suite to write Spring Boot applications or to create Spring Boot applications, and sample project, how to create a simple project in STS. And we discussed a prerequisite, most importantly CoreJava, and that too few concepts that you must have here to learn Spring Boot. And we started with bean creation, how Spring will create beans, and what type of beans that we have across the Spring. And we understand why we need to create these classes for any requirement, right? When we get any requirement, to fulfill that, we need to write some Java classes at backend. When we get any requirement, to fulfill that requirement, we have to write some Java classes. For each use case, we will be writing some Java classes. So we call all that classes as beans in Spring. In that beans, especially the first important one is controller. As per MVC, you know the importance of controller. Controller will read request which is coming from front end. Yeah, controllers will act like a first point of contact to your front end layer. When you get a request from you, controller will read data and basic validations it perform, and it will forward it to service layer, then repository. So here if you see Spring providing specific annotations to controller, @controller, @rest controller. If it is a service class where you want to handle business logic, we will use service with the combination of @transaction. We control transactions in the business layer. To handle CRUD operations, @repository. To create ORM-based mappings, @entity. This is part of ORM. If you are not aware of ORM, also fine. It's not a big deal. Easily you will understand what it is. And to receive data from which is coming from front end, we populate it into DTO and we carry that DTO object to everywhere. So we use a request body to get data into DTO. @component is a common annotation that we use for utility classes. For configurations, we go with @configuration. Apart from these classes, if you see any additional beans that you need to create, @bean we will use. Apart from all this, I found I need to write one class or custom class, custom configurations. For that, these annotations are not suitable. Then go with @bean. We'll explain in detail. Okay. But before going to all these, okay, I'll tell you the nature of Spring container. Okay, the nature of Spring container, how it is creating all these objects. Yesterday I discussed, right? Who is creating all these objects? Who is creating all these objects? With this simple example, I tried to make you understand how objects will be created. When we create some HTML code, the HTML code will be rendered into browsers. Browser will take care. I'm using Chrome browser. Chrome browser will render your HTML code to actual GUI elements, whichever you see in the UI. Browser do conversion, that HTML to UI conversion browsers will do. Similar way, when you write classes, controllers or service or DAOs, whichever classes you write, who will convert that classes into objects? Your Java interpreter. Java interpreter will help you to create these objects. Using Java command, we generally create objects, right? I mean, using Java command, when we run, all these objects will be created. That too, you will be using new keyword to create objects to them. By using new keyword, whenever you create object, those objects will load it into RAM, JVM. So who will render into JVM? Your Java interpreter only. Java interpreter is going to help you to create these objects. But manually, till now in core Java, manually we used to create these objects. Whenever there is an object required, how you used to create? Manually you used to create. When object is required, how to create objects in Java? I have a simple student class with methods. If I want to create object for the student class, I will create a main method class with a public static void main. In that main method class, I will be creating student object like the student equal to new student. New is a keyword which will help you to create object to the student class. So then your object will be created. Whenever you use new, immediately the object will be created. And apart from this, there is another approach, class.forName. Using class.forName also, you can pass your class name here. And by calling new instance also, you can create it. So this will help you to create objects during runtime. During runtime, based on your choice, it can create objects. Okay. So by using the similar approach, Spring internally creating your objects. By using this simple class.forName, internally Spring creating objects. Okay, step by step we will go how it will create objects. Generally, in old XML based approach, right? From there I will start how Spring creating objects for you. Later we will discuss why Spring create. I can also create by using new keyword. We will discuss about them. What happens if you create yourself? What happens if Spring creates? Okay. For any Java class which you create, in Spring framework, not in Spring Boot, in Spring framework, whichever controller or service or DAO, whichever classes you create, okay? Something, call it as controller, call it as service and DAO. These classes we used to configure, okay? This is in Spring framework. I'm talking Spring framework, not Spring Boot, okay? This classes first we configure in Spring XML file, okay? We take Spring XML file. In that Spring XML file, we configure these classes. There is a tag name called bean tag. In that XML, we take a bean tag and there we configure them. Each class we manually configure it. Controller, service classes, DAO classes. We used to configure them. Whichever classes, right, you have implemented. Using the simple bean tag, we used to configure them. Once configuration is done, we used to load this XML into IOC container. We used to load it into IOC container. Spring XML we used to load into IOC container. There are two types of containers, bean factory and application context. Let me divide this into two containers, Spring Core container and J2EE container. There are two types of containers. So bean factory is one type of container. It is a simple Java class only. Okay. Bean factory is a interface. For this interface, there is implementation called class path or XML bean factory. Okay. Consider XML bean factory. I'll give you the class name. Similar way, there is one more interface called application context. application context interface. For this interface, there is an implementation class name called class path XML application context. Class path XML application context is the implementation class. Okay. One is the core container. Bean factory is the core container. We call it as core container. And this is the J2EE container. These two options we used to have. If I load my XML file via Bean factory, if I use this container, if I use this core container, if I use this Bean factory core container to create objects, to create controller service DO objects, if I use Bean factory, it will do lazy object creation. Bean factory will do lazy object creation. Lazy object creation, which means on first request, it create object. On first request, it will create object. Next time onwards, next request onwards, same object it will return. Whichever object it creates first time, it will return the same object, which means singleton object it will create. On first request, it will create singleton object. Singleton objects means one object per entire application. It will not repeatedly create objects. Okay. Chiru requested for one, Sneha requested for one, Madhu requested for one. Okay. It will give the same object. It will not recreate again and again. It will not recreate them again and again. Singleton object only it will create. Singleton object will create. Next time onwards, next request onwards, it will return the same object. That is what singleton means. But when it will create at first user request, how to get that object? So when you call bean factory dot get bean method, when you use this bean factory class reference dot get bean, we will give this bean class name, whichever class you have configured above. If it is controller, we give controller dot class. Just you need to pass your controller class here. That's it. Whenever you use this statement, it will return you controller object. It will return you controller object. When you call controller reference.getBean of controller, this statement will return you object. This statement will return you object from container. It will create it whenever you call this method, right? First time, whenever you call this method first time, then it will create controller object. It will create your controller object. Again, if I call this statement for next 10 times also, if I call the same statement for next 10 times or 20 times also, it will not create object again and again. On first statement only, at this statement only, it will create object. Same object it will return, you call any number of times. But when it comes to J2EE container, right? Whenever you load XML file into J2EE container, whenever you load J2EE container, XML into J2EE container, immediately it will create all these objects. I configured 3 classes here. So 3 objects it will create immediately. Here, controller object created at this time, whenever you call reference dot get bean method. What about service DO classes? It will not create. If you request for them, then only it will create these objects also. But when it comes to J2EE container, it create one controller object, service object, and a DO object. It will wait for you. It will create them and it will wait. It will prepare them. It will prepare these objects. Whereas Bean Factory, just it will read your XML file and it will wait. Whenever you request for an object, it will create. Else, It will sit idle. Okay. So J2EE container immediately will create this object. So we call it as a early container. So early object creation during loading time object creation will happen here. Loading time object creation will happen here. Loading time object creation. Whenever you load, it will create it. So then already objects created, loading time objects created. Which objects? Singleton objects only. All objects are singleton. Then second step, on first request, will it create any object? No. Already during loading time, it created. So whenever you request it, request for every request. Now onwards, for every request, it will give the same object. Whichever objects already created, right? For every request, the same object only it will return. The only difference between these two containers is lazy and eager loading time. Lazy loading, and this is loading time object creation, early loading. So this is how core container and application container will behave. Okay, I'll give you this example, old Spring example. Then I'll jump into again Spring Boot. Okay, to make you understand what exactly at the rate Spring Boot application is doing internally, you will understand after this, example. I'll show you how these objects, how these classes need to configure into XML and how to load it into core and J2EE. You will easily realize what is happening around. Okay, if you want to practice these examples, right? So here is our blog, where it is. Just a minute. Yeah, here I'm sharing you this link. Just a minute. Take this link. This is not for Spring Boot, everyone. Okay, for Spring Boot, I'll create a different link. This is Spring. Okay, download jar files here. Spring jar files will be available. First download option. If you click here, all Spring down jars will be downloaded. And this is CoreJava example, how to create objects at runtime. Class.forName example yesterday I told you, right? So you can refer this one, CoreJava example. For Spring Core container, you can use this example. For J2EE container, you can use this example. That's it. Don't, if you are interested really, download all these examples and practice. Okay. Otherwise, I don't recommend you to take everything. Now, anyway, I'll create one example or just download core and J2EE. Let import them. Okay, Spring Core, extract it here. J2EE already we have. Okay, let me import it. Already jar files also have here. First one is jars. All these are Spring 3 version jar files. This is manual, job that we used to do. A lot of manual, libraries via Maven dependencies or directly keeping them into libraries. We used to handle this manually. But in Spring Boot, nothing, just creating project and we are running it. Let this tool start. If not installed it, please install the Spring toolset, okay? I'm sharing you this link. So install JDK and STS also. Please do this so that if you're stuck anywhere to practice, I'll help you. Already STS window I opened, right? Okay, it is there. So go to file, just Import simple Java project, existing project into workspace. Go to downloads, Spring Core. Just import it. Finish. Okay, this is first example. Same way, let me import second example also. Spring Core container. It tells about Spring Core container. Second one, J2EE container. Okay, let's see Spring Core example. It is giving warning, reason, libraries, maybe not found. See, these three are the important jar files for Spring Core. Spring Beans, Spring Core commons logging jar files. It is saying I am not able to find them. No problem. I will add them. Add external jars. Go to downloads again. We downloaded already libraries, right? I'm just adding all the libraries. All libraries not required, but I just added them, okay? Now if I go here, see there is a simple test class. I created a simple test class and constructor and one XML file, Spring XML file. Here I configured it as a bean class name test, ID, scope. We'll talk about the scopes. Basically always scope is singleton by default until unless we configure it as a prototype. And here is my client class. Reading XML file from this path, loading it into my XML bean factory. Then requesting object first time. This line number 18 telling this. First time request reference.getBean. First time we are requesting for the object. Then it will create. At line number 18, one object will be created. The next time onwards, no new object. Same object will be delivered to you. So T1, T2, T3, T4, all these objects are same. When you compare them, right, using double equal, we use double equal to compare the hashing, right? Objects are equal or not, we can check. So now it tells you all these objects are one or not. Means singleton object. It is not creating repeatedly. Call it 100 times, 1000 times or million times. Same object only it will return. Which means it reserved only one memory in your RAM. That's it, not too many. Run this. Test object is created. Even though I called for 4 times, only one object is created. Remaining all it is showing true, 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 true. Means T1 is equal to T2, T2, 3, T2 equal to T3, T3 equal to T4. All objects are same. Got it? So when this first object created, if you have doubt, let me put it in debug mode. Okay, debug mode always tells you what's happening in every step. Instead of run as, go to debug as Java application. I added debug pointer here. Your control application execution will come here and stops. Okay, now execution came here, it stopped. See here, already these two lines executed, line number 14 and 16. I don't see any object creation output here. Okay, already I found this XML file and I have loaded it into my bean factory container. Still there is no object. So go to next step. We will use this one. F6 or this button you can. Next. Okay. So 18 line executed. When 18 line executed, you can see test object is created. When the line 18 is executed, test object is created. So again, same line only, right? Same code only I have written in the line number 19. So when I execute line number 19 also, it should create a object, right? See, line number 19 also executed, but no new object output. Only whatever object already created, that only object is there. See, there is no new object. But no errors also it is giving. Means, yes, it is returning same object only. T1, one object given, test at the rate 1BA 9117E. In T2 also you will see the same reference. Same one. In T3 also you can see the same one. Same object. So this is the object it is creating. T4, same one. If you run this line also, you can see the same object. So then it is proved that giving the same object which is created at first time request. Next, next, next. True, true, true. Because all are same objects. Clear? As I said, core container creating objects lazily. Lazily means on first request. When container create objects on first request, we call it lazy. That is how we learn from servlets. Okay. So on first request only, it will create object. We can debate why it need to create on first request. Why can't before first request? What are all the advantages, disadvantages? We can go into that discussion, but not required now. Okay. Now, object got created at first request if it is a core container. Let's see about J2EE container, how it is behaving. Okay, let me go into J2EE container. Go to properties. One extra jar file we are adding here, context jar file. This context jar file is having application context. Okay, so these 4 jar files are actually required. Just remove them. Add external jars. Apply and close. Now same test class I have here. One thing you observed or not, I don't know. Nobody asked a question. Our bean class is private. Private constructor you have there. You must have observed. If you observe, you should have asked a question here. What we learned from CoreJava is, if we have any private constructor to a class, we can't create object from outside. I'll come to that. Okay. So here we have test class and the bean ID T. And loading this into J2EE container. Application context AP equal to new class path XML application context, directly giving XML here. That's it. Calling same bean for 3 times. Test T or T1. Same bean for 3 times from application context. This one also I'll run it in debug mode and see what will happen. System.out.println T1 is equal to T2, T2 equal to T3, T3 equal to T4. Just first run it. Oh, not T4. T1 equal to T2, T2 equal to T3. Okay, 2 fine. Run it. Test object, one object created, though we called 3 times. Then it is saying true, true. Okay, all these objects are same, it is saying. Run it in debug mode. I'll keep debug point here. Line number 14. debug as Java application. Let's see this. This line number 14 not yet executed, but test object got created. How? During loading time itself, it is creating object for your class. During loading time itself, it is creating object. Done. Object is created. Then, if you request for the same object, right? If you request for that same object, the same one it will return to you. Call it any number of times. See, same object. Same object is returning to you. Finish. True, true. Hope you understand, right? J2.
Sir, I have one question actually.
Yeah.
It's regarding the core container. So as you said that when we are using core container, at that time, like on the first request, it will create the objects, right? So suppose we have multiple classes. Okay. So in that case, on the first request, it will create the object for all the classes which are like mapped into the XML file.
On first request of this particular class only, not for
Okay.
all the classes. Okay. Let me
Okay.
introduce one more class here in the core container. I'll create one more class called something called student. System.out.println of student object. Configure this here into your XML file. Go to XML, bean, class, beans.student, ID is equal to something like this. Okay. Now I have two classes in core container. Go and run it. How many objects it created? Test object only. Where is student object? I haven't even requested for it. That's why it is not created. If you request for student object reference is yes. Okay. Now line number 28 is calling for student. Then it will create. At this line, you requested for it. Then it created student object. Got it?
Yeah. Got it.
So it will create object only for that particular class, whichever you called. I have millions of classes here in my application. Generally, we don't have that many. We will have like hundreds of classes. Okay. I have hundreds of classes. Whenever I request for a particular class, that particular class object only this bean factory will create. And it is not going to create all other classes objects.
Okay. And
Whereas
if
application context, whereas application context, let me put the same student class here in this beans package and configure it here in the XML file. Okay. Let me run this application context. This one I am running it. I'm not calling any get bean of student here. Nowhere I'm calling for student. But as my container is a early container, right? It is creating objects for both of them. Test object and student object. Both got created.
okay.
Though even I'm not calling it. Okay. Everyone understand how core container creating and how J2EE container creating? Now, one question to you all. Think in a real-time application perspective, okay? Excuse me. In real-time application means, let's say food delivery application. Okay? Food delivery applications, you see, right? Swiggy, Zomato, all these. So in that food delivery application, let me explain the use case also. There is an order page. In this order page, you selected some items. Okay, some food item you selected and you are placing an order, place order. Then there should be a controller at backend side. There is a controller, food or order? Order controller? Order service? Listen this question carefully, okay? I hope you all can easily answer this. Order, service, order, DAO. All these are Spring classes. Consider like your test class, student class. These all are your classes. Now, which container you recommend to use here? Core container or J2EE container? Here I have Bean Factory, application context. Okay. So application context will create object during starting time, application starting itself. Bean Factory will create object at a first time user request. You understand that, right? It will create object on first order. When it will create on first order, it create 3 objects. Of course, if he needs order controller object, controller may need service object, service may need DO object. So on first order, it will create objects for you. It will create objects. But this application context will create objects during deployment time. When you start your server, right? Developers when start server, dev when start server, right? It will create object. Developers, whenever they start servers, immediately those objects will created. So which one you recommend for this application and why?
I'm thinking Naveen, it's for application context.
Can you please speak a little louder?
I'm thinking it's application context.
Application context. Why?
When they order like any customer, that time only they will, that time they will create, and they will say, okay, it is available or not.
No, you are saying Bean Factory or application context.
Application context.
Why? Reason? Whenever.
Whenever like customer order, suppose that in that menu, they place their order details.
Mhm.
Okay, so when any like waiter came and asked to like, okay, any consumer said they want this item, then that person go to and check that part is available or not.
Mhm.
Based on that, it will means they keep some item ready. If it is available, they can serve.
Okay. So you are saying application context. If I go with application context, it will uh, prepare all these objects readily available for the developer so that he can quickly place the order. That is what you are saying.
Yes.
Okay. And what about others? Did you guys understand the question? So which
Actually, in the
container
waiting
is
time
good to
display,
use here?
if you use application context, the waiting time will not be there. Like in Bean
Hmm.
Factory, suppose there are 1,000 requests or million of requests. So it
Correct.
has to create the object and then it has to serve, right?
Correct.
So
So no waiting time to customer. Any challenges you see if I go with Bean Factory? So
in
this is
Bean
one
Factory, you
valid
have to
point.
wait.
What is the problem if I go with Bean Factory?
Suppose there are millions of requests, okay, and if
Mm-hmm.
the request takes 1 second, like to process and create the object, so
Mm-hmm.
it will
But
take.
all your objects are singletons only, na?
Uh,
On first request only, it will create object.
Create the object, yes.
But it's okay. But you are there actually. Your point also correct. Okay. So there is no waiting time. Not only waiting time, the first customer may encounter object creation issues also, right? While we start creating these objects, In the constructor of this class, if you have any logic that is reading file, if that file is missing, if I start object creation during first user request, during object creation, if some dependencies, files or some XYZ parameters if missed, then he will see runtime exceptions, correct? There is a chance to see runtime exception. Chance to encounter runtime exceptions here. If user see any runtime exception, if user see any such runtime exception, he will just close the tab and uninstall. He will never come back again. Correct?
Yeah.
If you see error in Zomato while you are trying to place order, if you see Jdbc URL is wrong or database connection went wrong, will it make any sense? No. But if I do that here, if object creation started while dev started server, I am the developer, I am sitting along with my DevOps team, they started Jenkins pipeline, and if there any error, they will report to me, hey man, you did something wrong in your code, let's correct it and put it in the application, or test properly in your local and promote it. Otherwise, it will not work. Then immediately I'll realize the problem and I'll sort it out there. So no waiting time, no chance. I mean, less chances of, no chances, less chances, less chances of issues, less chances of runtime issues. Anyway, we will get here and there, less chances of runtime issues. At least for object creation, we can avoid less, or I can put no chances. This is one more, great thing that we encounter at the beginning itself when we started server itself. Otherwise, if I go with bean factory, there is a chance I can see errors. It's okay, right? If I have hundreds of classes here, let's say I have 100 more classes here, 100 more classes I have here. It's okay to create all that 100 plus these three classes, 103 objects in my RAM. It's okay. I have enough RAM. I can hold that 103 objects. If I use application context, 103 objects it will create. What is the issue? Let it create. When developer deployed this, when servers start, right, immediately 103 objects will be created here. It's okay. During deployment time here, there will be 0 objects. There will be 0 objects. There will be 0 objects. It's okay. There will be 0 objects. When first time user request, then it will try to create all that 103 objects. During creation of this 103 objects, it may encounter some issues. There is a chance to encounter runtime exceptions. So to avoid that, go with eager object creation. During loading time only, it is good to create all the objects. It is good to create objects during loading time only. Now coming to singleton. I was saying only one object it is creating. From these examples, we realized that call it 3 times, 100 times or million times, only one object is creating. Only one single object is getting created, singleton. If not singleton, what is the other approach or what is the other option we have? Here, these objects can be prototype also. Scope is equal to prototype. Prototype means for every request, a new object. When you mention prototype, it will create a new object for every request. See, test object, test object, test object. I called 3 times object created. What about if I have this code for, now coming to this example, what about if I see customers, customer 1, and throughout the day, Google it, if you want Zomato or Swiggy, how many requests they will get a day. I see there are 2 million or 3 million requests minimum they are getting every day. 3 million requests may come from the customer. every day, not throughout the month or throughout the year. 3 million customers request may come to my application. If I go with this way, prototype way, if I go with prototype way, if I configure scope to prototype, if I configure scope to prototype to my objects, though you have 103 classes to place a order. If I go with the prototype, instead of 103 objects, this use case is about scope singleton. In singleton scenario, they are creating objects at first time request or during loading time, only the specific number of classes you have, that many objects only. If it is a prototype, if scope is equal to, prototype, behavior will be same. Sorry. If scope is equal to prototype, yet at every user request, it need to create object. At every user request, it need to create objects. Both behavior will be same in prototype, bean factory and application context. For every request, okay, first Chiru requested for order. So for him, it will create 3 million into, sorry, it will create 103 objects for Chiru. What about other users? 3 million requests if I get into 3 million. Every day it will create, what is the count? 309 million objects it will create on your server. Will it hold that many objects? Will processor maintain? Will your RAM can hold? If I get, okay, 3 million requests at a day. On peak time, maybe lunch time, if I get 500,000 requests, at least for 500,000 requests, I need to create 500,000 objects, 500,000 into 100. I don't know what is the count. 50, 100, 50 million objects it need to create in the RAM. Will RAM hold that many objects? It may die. Or it need to scale up. And we need to pay, where actually we need to pay maybe monthly 10,000 rupees. Instead of that, your billing cost may go to, instead of 10,000, 10 million you may need to pay. Because of you consumed that much RAM. I don't know the prices, but yeah, that is how you need to pay. If you go with prototype, prototype is not really required. Prototype is not really required for your controller, service, DAOs. Singleton is enough. So if it is a singleton, there will be a problem, right, sir? If I place order, I'm a vegetarian, I placed for one veg biryani. Someone placed for non-veg biryani. Is my order not going to override with others' order? No, nothing will happen. Because before request coming into your singleton objects, there is a tomcat. It will take care. It will process each one of your request via separate thread. So thread means separate memory for you, separate memory for me. So it will not override. There is a chance to override if you use common variable, but we will not use. We will never use common variable. Via separate thread, your data will come here. Once we got the data here, to carry our food request, right? We will use separate prototype objects here that we call DTOs. Maybe food object we will create, food DTO. That will be prototype, will hold your data. Food DTO. So whenever, for every request it will create, this is a request scope. For every request, that food DTO objects will get created. So my order will be in one food DTO, your order will be in one food DTO. So like that, it will maintain the data via DTOs, and we transfer this data across other classes to process it. So the same DTOs we send it to service and service to DAO. If DAO is using ORM, from DTO to entity, it will convert DTO to entity, it will convert here. And we will save it into database. Finally, these entities will be saved into database. Your orders will be saved into database. So for always, right? For always, for all these classes, controller services, DAOs, we use a singleton scope only, and we go with this application context at dev time. When developer starts server itself, it will create all the objects. That is the real time scenario that we use. Is it clear? Silence?
I had a question about like how one object is going to take care of 1,000,000 requests, but you just explained that server part. So I think that satisfies my question.
Yeah, you got it right. DTO objects will hold your data. Those are request scope objects only. Okay. Those are request scope. For every request, one object will be created for these DTOs.
But they're all related to that one object, right? Across all the.
Yeah, these all are single objects only, which are controller services, DAOs, application classes, we call them. All these application classes for them, one object only will be created. But to carry your data, there should be an object, right? Specific object for you. So that we call DTOs. That will be prototype. When I show you end-to-end application, right, you will realize what is this request scope, how it will hold data. So for every customer, one food DTO object will be created. That is mandatory. At least we avoided this 103 classes object creation, right? One object is anyway required to carry your data. Okay, this is prototype only. Only
So
this one.
yeah, the example that you showed, the this application context and bin factory, the downloadable items. So that will work in MacBook also?
Yeah. You can import anywhere. You need to have this tool Eclipse or STS. Just import them. Go to import option, existing project into workspace. Go to the download location. Go to download location. Select the folder which you extracted and import it here and click on finish button. That's it.
Okay.
Then you
And
need to correct the jar files here. It will show you jars are not available. So you just go to properties and here you have build path. You need to go to build path. It will show errors on your library. Just select those library, remove them and click on external jar files. You will be downloading jars also, right? The first download option having these jar files.
right.
So select all. You need not to specifically select 1, 2 jar files. Select all and click on open. That's it. You are done.
So are we also going to use Java 8 features, and are we going to talk about that during project?
Especially we are not going to focus on Java 8 features during Spring discussions, but here and there, whenever required during our examples, right, we can use them. The
Okay.
lambdas or streams. We can
Method
apply.
reference.
Yeah, during some use cases creation. Okay.
Okay. Because in project we use Java 8 features a lot, right?
Java 8 is having a lot of features. Okay. The functional interfaces concept itself is a big concept. It is having so many functional interfaces.
Right.
If you guys, I can help you. I will share the examples that usually I do also practice, right? I can share you that. Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Naveen, that food DTO is a entity, correct? So entity
DTO is
has
not
the
entity. Entity is a different, right? DTOs are DTOs only. They are not entities. Yeah, of course, it is a bean, simple bean class.
okay. So like what I am thinking, instead of food DTO, if means one thread requested for the veg biryani, so veg biryani will be the bean then, right? That also has the singleton object. At the same time, second thread come with the request of
No,
same
no, no.
veg biryani.
No. We can't go that way. Generally, for each food item, we can't hold one object. The food is dynamic, right? Today, in my menu, I have veg biryani, dham biryani, something like that. Tomorrow, something, a mixed veg biryani. I can't create object with the specific food name. Okay, it should be very generic. It should
Okay.
supposed to handle any food.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. So,
So yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
There is another question. So if that test has the private constructor, how container is able to create the object of test?
Okay, good question. You guys read about it. Go to Google it. Tomorrow I'll explain.
Sorry, can you come again, Snail? I didn't hear the question actually.
That test class particular in core container or that J2EE container, there is test class which has the private constructor. So
Okay.
the class which has the private constructor from outside, we are not able to create object of that class, but still
Uh,
container
I
created.
think I have some insights on that, but
yeah, it can create. It can. That is what right
I
I
think
said.
there is some
It
set
exactly,
access specifier is there, right? Like if you
exactly,
load the from class.forName, we'll get all
exactly,
the methods, and then
exactly.
there we can
So
see.
this
Yeah.
class dot for name is doing that magic. Okay, it will make your constructor accessible. We can make private constructors also accessible. It helps to access private constructors also, private methods also, fields also. Nothing private to this class dot for name. This is a reflection API. Okay, it can access anything if you go with the reflections.
So
Okay,
internally, like in Spring, they are using the same concept, right? To
yeah, exactly. Without this core internal concept, from where Spring will access it, core Java should accept first Spring,
yeah,
right? Core Java encouraging Spring to use this. You got it right?
yeah,
Your as core is having such a feature, so Spring is able to apply their framework concepts on top of it. Otherwise,
yes.
from where they will bring it if your Java not accepting. Okay, yeah. The beauty is there in this Java itself. So they utilized it. They written lot of thousands of lines of code to make our job simple. Instead, we do this every time. They made it as a framework and given, just asking us to play around. Okay. Yeah,
I
we
have
can do this. Maybe you can see a core Java example. Okay. Tomorrow I'll show you with core
Naveen sir,
Java
I have one
example.
question regarding the scope which you have mentioned. So,
Mhm.
like scope is there for every bean, right? Like suppose we have 5 Java classes.
Mhm.
So for every class we have we can like change the scope as prototype. Like suppose there are 2 classes where we need that those objects should be
You
created
can
on
put,
each
yeah. It is
request.
not
Yes,
mandatory that every class need to have the same scope. You
yes,
can have,
exactly.
but if you ask this question in a different way, I have one singleton scope. That singleton scope bean is accessing prototype bean. Is that really required? Then it's a different concept.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not going into that route. Okay. That will create a lot of confusion. So
Yeah.
at this beginning of this context itself, we should not go in that route. Okay. Yeah. So why I discuss this core concepts is to explain this at the rate Spring Boot application. If I directly tell you this is how it will read and it will create objects, you may not able to imagine that. You may not able to digest it. But now if I tell you this Spring Boot application is reading like XML file and loading these classes, then you will realize it. Okay. Still, there is one more example that need to finish that I will do. Okay. Component scanning is there in XML itself. That XML example will finish and show you at the rate Spring Boot application more insights. Okay. Is it clear? Am I running fast or
It's clear for me, sir.
Others also, you know, if you see I'm running fast, or if you're not able to catch up, stop me there itself. I can explain you, any number of times. I'm trying to make the concepts are very simple and clear. Uh, okay. Anyway, videos are there. You can revise the session again and again, but during the live context itself, right? If you get any doubts, you can ask me. So I hope it is clear for today. Tomorrow will continue. Okay. I think tomorrow is the last day. Please complete with your payments. And already people joined into WhatsApp group, right? If you're not joined it, please join. I'll be sharing WhatsApp group link here in the chat. Let me share it right away. Group, where it is. SB, right? SB group name. Just a minute. Can someone share if you have that WhatsApp group link already? I shared here. Okay. So see in this chat, Zoom chat I'm sharing. Okay. Go to chat and click on this link. This is WhatsApp group. Okay. Please join there if you are new today. I see many of you are existing guys only. Please join this group. Okay. Hope you all clear. Tomorrow we'll continue. Okay. If you have any doubts, you can reach out to me on my phone. Okay. I'll be available. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Have a good day. Bye.